Hello, and welcome to the Built for Growth podcast. I am your host, Miesha Tate. Some of you may know me from the UFC or from Celebrity Big Brother 3, but even if this is your first time hearing of me or the B4G podcast, I'm happy to have you here. So why start a podcast? Of course, I get asked this question a lot. So I think I will start with a little bit of my backstory because it probably helps to understand the how first. So I was born in Tacoma, Washington, and I grew up as a bit of a tomboy, but I never thought of myself in this way. I actually never really thought to label myself in these stereotypes, and I think that was a really important piece to my story. So many people are quick to label you, and I think it's just as important to push back on those labels, especially if they become more like barriers. And speaking of barriers, I realize I have made a career out of breaking them. However, I had no idea that I was even doing this most of the time. And I believe I got this quality from my mother, who I would describe as a cycle breaker. She became the kind of mother she didn't have. She has always been someone who believed in me even when I couldn't see it in myself. And I still remember the day that I came home from high school as a freshman, and I asked my mother if I could join the all-male wrestling team. And she could have stopped me right there. She could have told me what so many other parents told their daughters: wrestling isn't for girls. But she didn't. She said, if you want to try this, you have my support. And I may never know another person who loves me as much as my mom. So the next day I showed up for wrestling practice and I got my butt kicked for the better part of 2 hours. I remember regrouping after practice in the locker room with my friend Sharon, whose idea it was to join the boys wrestling team in the first place. We had been put through the gauntlet, and it was clear that these guys, like so many others, also condoned the idea that women did not belong on the mat. I guess I should have known, because this was well before women's wrestling was a thing. There were still so many glass ceilings for females in this area of my sport. My second day of practice was no easier, nor my third, and this continued. But eventually, the resistance from the team started to dissipate and acceptance began to grow. Regardless, I loved wrestling. I took great satisfaction in the fact that they could try to make me quit, but they could not make me quit. It was the hardest thing I had ever done in my young 15 years of life. And with all the mat burns, bloody noses, and even a broken ankle at one point, I knew I would never quit. And so I showed up every day of the season for the next 4 years. I trained with and competed against primarily males, which meant I got used to losing a lot. It didn't help that I was never a tiny girl. I still remember my first weight check. I was 130.6 pounds. And to offer perspective, the lightest weight class is 103 pounds. And it's rare to see a senior still wrestling at 103 pounds, because usually as you grow physically, you also grow with experience. So what I lacked in experience, I tried to make up for with determination and my physical flexibility. That helped too. Most people set out to win in their respective sports, but a win for me was just not getting pinned. I set a bar at an attainable level so that even when I lost, I could take away the wins that I could. I went on to take a few key lessons away from wrestling that I'm still grateful for to this day. I learned that with hard work and a great ethic and a never give up mentality, that perception can be changed. I learned that I am far more resilient than I ever could have known. I learned that I'm capable and that strength is not solely defined by what we can do with our body, but more importantly, what we can do with our mind. And when I think of my life without wrestling, my heart sinks. I believe that had it not been for wrestling, I never would have found my love for mixed martial arts. And I have no doubt I never would have become a UFC world champion. So that brings me to my next big milestone. That would be my first mixed martial arts fight. I was 19 years old, attending Central Washington University, and fighting was nowhere on my radar. But the universe had other plans for me. My friend Rosalia invited me to try a mixed martial arts club sport offered here at the college. I declined her offer. I really had no interest in learning martial arts. She persisted, and at some point, I finally gave in. And on my first day, I learned how to choke people. And you guessed it, I was hooked. This, however, did not mean that I had any desire to fight people. Actually, it was quite the opposite. I cringed at the idea of getting hit, nor did I have any desire to impose this type of violence on anyone else. But again, destiny had other plans. I was invited by my new circle of friends to attend a live amateur fight event, and in a single night, my aversion to fighting disappeared. I was totally captivated as the fights unfolded. I actually did not even see violence. I saw art, passion, and the will to persevere. As the crowd was filing out of the stadium that night, I sat on the bleachers in awe. I had a very visceral experience to watching the live action. And then I heard an announcement begin. There would be an all-female fight card in 3 weeks. If there are any females in the audience interested in participating, please make your way down to the desk and sign up. I think you know where I'm going with this. So I'll skip forward 3 weeks to where I'm standing inside of a boxing ring with my hands wrapped and MMA gloves securely taped around my wrist. I had never really been in a fight, besides one time in 3rd grade when a little boy swung at me and I gave him a bloody nose, but I digress. The bell rings and round 1 has begun. I am fighting Liz Posner. And all I really know about her is that she owns a Muay Thai kickboxing gym with her husband in Canada. I, on the other hand, did not know the first thing about striking. I will say that round 1 was, however, the easiest takedown I had ever gotten. I controlled her easily from the top position, but I still didn't understand the full concept of fighting. Embarrassingly, I'm not even sure that I threw a single strike on the ground in round 1. Round 2 begins, and she quickly locks me into a Muay Thai clinch, and I was stuck. The next 3 knees that she sent hit me in the face, one of which smashed my nose. I had no idea what a Thai clinch was, nor did I have a good idea of how to escape it. So I remember trying to grab a hold of her legs and dodge knees. And eventually I sort of slid down her legs towards her ankles, which ultimately I was happy with because at least I was out of the danger zone. At this point, she was able to quickly maneuver behind me where she put her hooks in and had now attached herself to me like a human backpack. I remember sitting there on my elbows and knees, carrying her weight on my back, while simultaneously pressing my shoulders up to my ears like a turtle trying to pull its head into its shell, as she was actively trying to get an arm around my neck for a rear naked choke win. I'm going to get a little graphic here for a second, so if you need to hit fast forward about 15 seconds, now's your chance. I vividly recall watching a steady stream of blood run from the tip of my nose into a puddle that was now growing on the mat in front of my face. And looking back at my career, that must have been the moment that I knew I was a fighter. Because although I was down, I was not out. So I collected myself and I began using the skills that I did have, relying on my wrestling to buck her and roll her off of my back, all the way beneath me. I stood up, raised my fist to the ceiling, and threw it down repeatedly until shortly after that, the bell ended the second round. There was blood all over me, all over her, and the canvas had also been largely painted red. I went back to my corner feeling happy, like I finally realized what I was here to do. But when I looked at the faces of my coaches, it looked to me like they didn't seem to share the same opinion. They actually looked more like ghosts. I'm not sure they were ready for a female to come back to the corner, so obviously damaged and bloody. My corner threw in the towel, and this just basically means they decided I should not go out for the third round. I was upset. I was even more upset when I saw the look of relief on my opponent's face. I felt that her and I both knew what was going to happen in that third round. She had hit me with her best shot, but it only made me stronger. And now I was coming for her, or at least I would have liked to. But that's not how this chapter of my story was written. It was out of my hands, and looking back at it now, I'm okay with it, because we didn't know how badly my nose was broken, and I wasn't getting paid. This was an amateur fight. The medical bills were mine to endure, and I was already a broke college student. But I'm not sure what hurt my pride more, losing my first fight or having to come home, see my family, and greet my grandparents who were visiting for the holidays. My grandfather wasn't a sensitive man. He certainly didn't know how to choose his words to spare anyone's feelings. And so the first thing he said to me was, "Well, it looks like you have learned your lesson." My face did look something like a raccoon and a lion had a baby. My eyes were both big black circles, and my nose was wide. The swelling was so bad that my cheeks came forward far enough to take away any distinguishing feature that the bridge of my nose would normally have. I overheard many comments over the next week or so about my poor decisions. My parents got some heat too. I was frustrated. The craziest thing of it all was probably that in all of my silence, I was already plotting a comeback. Not that I had really made anything of myself in this sport yet, but I had a deep desire to at least have one fight that showed I could certainly be better than I was that night. I knew that it wasn't for a lack of heart or determination. It simply boiled down to a lack of knowledge and proper fight preparation. 3 weeks was not enough time to learn the offenses and defenses of striking. So that's what I set out to do. To my family's dismay, I fought 6 more times that year, winning all of them. And then my coach received a request for a professional female fighter to come to Evansville, Indiana, and be a part of the first ever Bowdog hook and shoot women's bantamweight and flyweight tournament. I was not a professional yet, but my coach seemed to think I could handle it. It sounded pretty great to me too, because I would get paid $500 for a fight, and getting paid for a chance sounded really nice, actually. I had a terrible time making weight for this event. I knew nothing about how to cut weight properly, and when I say cut weight, I'm referring to the dehydration process that fighters, wrestlers, boxers, and even jockeys may participate in, usually about 24 hours before weigh-ins. I also did not know much about dieting either. I ate healthy compared to most people, but being a professional athlete really requires a whole different approach to fueling your body. And I prepared to dehydrate, but I didn't know how to dehydrate and rehydrate efficiently. I was not good at this process, and although I would become better at the dieting and weight cutting process, it wasn't until about 15 years later that I would actually understand the science behind weight cutting and how to maximize results while minimizing damage done during such an extreme ask of the body. Anyways, I did indeed weigh in at 136 pounds, and I may have been locked in a sauna at a period of time, but as I continue with my story, my first draw of the tournament was a woman named Jan Finney. She was then known as the hardest hitting female in MMA. She was the most experienced female in the event and local to Evansville. In all betting odds, she was favored to win the whole thing. I was waiting inside the ring as Jan made her walk. I still remember that she had on a Native American costume that she stripped off to her fight outfit. And as the fight unfolded, it turned out we were more evenly matched than anyone had originally thought. She laced me with hard leg kicks, and I finally caught one and took her down. I was stiff and rudimentary in my striking, very much so. But I had pretty good timing for my takedowns, and I got them more quickly each round. After the third round finished, we waited for the judge's decision. Finney and I became, sort of comrades in that moment. We started complimenting each other on the things that we had done well. And I told her that those leg kicks were so hard. And she told me that I reminded her of Janelle Marquez, which I took as a real compliment. Janelle Marquez was another accomplished wrestler from Washington State who I looked up to. The judge's decision sure was taking a long time, and things were starting to get awkward. And finally, after what felt like an eternity, the referee notified us that we must fight a fourth round, which neither one of us was prepared to do, but we found ourselves with no other choice. We put our game faces back on and we went to war for another round, which to this day, there is no record of. The videos of the fight only show 3 rounds, and online it's listed as a 3-round fight as well. But I remember the fourth. I remember it because it was grueling and it was unexpected, and one of us was going to have to fight again later that night. I got my takedown relatively quickly again, and I felt pretty confident that I had won the fight. Panting and sweating again, we let down our guards and complimented each other on another round well fought. We found ourselves waiting longer than it should have taken for a final decision, and I was getting antsy. The ref walked over to us again, and at this time, he gave us a choice. He said the judges cannot agree on who has won, so either you both can fight another round, or you can both agree, as the judges do, to give me permission to make the final decision on who has won this fight, since I do have the best seat in the house. Jan and I looked at each other, and absolutely exhausted we were. We agreed to let the referee make his final call. I stood there nervously until I felt the referee raise my hand. I was thrilled, relieved, and exhausted. I think I must have had a pretty big adrenaline dump. I went to the back and watched the next fight, knowing whoever won would be my next opponent for the night. Caitlin Young made it look easy, knocking out another debut pro in less than 30 seconds. I didn't like that. As I sat there icing my quad from the kicks that had caused a fair bit of swelling in my leg, I heard my name being called up to fight again. I thought I had more time. I was not even close to warmed up again. I unwrapped the ice from my quad quickly, and I tried to jump around and at least thaw my leg out a little. There was no time. The music was playing, and it was go time. The fight started, and I began my stiff, robotic way of moving around the ring, and a head kick crashed into my hand with so much momentum, it continued enough to cause me to lose my balance. But I got up, and I quickly got to work on connecting myself to her legs. I lifted her with all I had, and I could not understand how she was keeping her balance. I would later rewatch the video and realize she had grabbed the ropes. I can't blame her for it, though. I think it was just instinct. But that lift took a lot out of my gas tank, and I don't think I had a lot more to give. I needed time to recover, but I didn't have it. She broke free from my grip and found her target. and her kick came like a baseball bat across my face, and I was unconscious. When I came to, I had no recollection of the fight. I actually couldn't even remember the first fight. I do remember being so confused and asking repeatedly if I had fought Jan Finney yet. And I was asking if I had won or if I had lost. As I was reminded by my corner about the sequence of events that had unfolded that night, it was like being told a story I had never heard. But somehow the main character was me. Talk about brain trauma. Yikes. But it wouldn't be until many years later that I began to even think about the health of my brain. And that brings me to 2008, my next fight following that brutal KO loss. It was against two-time K1 kickboxing world champion Elena Beef Maxwell. Still love that nickname. I know that I was brought in to lose this fight because it was in San Jose, which was her hometown. I took the fight up a weight class at 145 pounds. And it seemed that her and her coach, Kung Lee, who had previously been a main event for Strikeforce, thought that I might be an easy knockout, given that I had just been knocked out 7 months ago, had my lights turned off by a kickboxer who on paper was not a K1 kickboxing champion. I did not want that to happen again, so I trained so hard for this fight. Although I had only been offered one fight by the organization, I wanted to make an impression. I was excited for the challenge, and I came with the best game plan that I had the ability of executing at the time. Smother, smother, smother. You see, if you are a grappler, you don't want to try to stay away from strikes. Strikers love space. And although it can be extremely scary to constantly move forward while someone is trying to snipe you, I promise it's usually the better game plan if winning is the objective. You expect to take damage in fights. In a fighter's mind, it's worth it to secure a victory. I literally ran at her, and I shoveled both of us into the cage, round after round, securing my takedowns. And surprisingly, I took very little damage for it. It was nice to have a fight in a cage. Strikeforce used a cage at the time instead of the boxing rings that most organizations still used. The support of the walls made it so much easier to impose my style, and that's exactly what I did. I recall having an armbar fully extended at one point in the fight, but she didn't tap, and I didn't have my leverage points quite right. The bell rang, and that was the end. I still won a unanimous decision, and then to my delight, Strikeforce offered me a multi-fight contract, which meant if I signed with them, I could actually be guaranteed 3 fights a year. And if I won, I could make more money each time I returned victorious. I think my first fight contract was either $1,500 or $2,000 to show up and double that to win. Count me in. Was by far my biggest paycheck, and I needed it. I was so infatuated with the sport that I had sacrificed everything to pursue it. I had quit school. I was driving an old beat-up car, and I lived in a 22-foot motorhome that had been parked right out of the barn-style gym that belonged to Dennis Hallman on his personal property. It was known as Victory Athletics, located in Olympia, Washington. I lived there for the better part of 2 years, and I was so broke that I qualified for food stamps. But it was okay. I couldn't afford to go to the movies. I could barely afford gas. But I had a dream, and I was all in. I went 11 wins and 1 loss from this point up until Ronda Rousey. Oh, Ronda, you probably know we were not best friends. As a matter of fact, I am still told this is the biggest rivalry in women's combat sports to date. I fought as hard as I could, but Ronda was just better then. I really didn't have experience with any type of judo styles, and she was a judo Olympic medalist. It was hard to find any training partners with a style of judo, and almost none of them were also fighters, meaning they would not let me punch them in the face while they tried to throw me. And females with this kind of extensive judo background in MMA just simply did not exist at the time. So the best we found we could do was to break up the training into chunks and practice piece by piece, which was not typical. Usually you will drill certain parts, but ideally you want to practice mixing things together as seamlessly as possible. Rhonda was ahead of her time, and it was extremely difficult to prepare for her. I felt like I went out on my shield in both of our fights, though. I am proud of how I grew through those moments. Losing to Rhonda was one of the most painful things I have ever had to endure, and it was absolutely devastating both times. But it shaped me. It prepared me for life in ways I couldn't have imagined, and I'm eternally grateful to have had a rival like Rhonda. Not everybody does. I went on to fight in the UFC, which was a real dream come true. And it was like the impossible becoming possible, because when I had first set out on this journey, I honestly didn't know if I would ever have a chance to fight where only men were allowed. It seemed really far-fetched to think that I would have anything to do with getting women in the UFC. I still look back with a gratitude for the opportunity I had to be a part of breaking that glass ceiling. And I'm so thankful that I had the will to keep going, even after any and all of my losses. Because this hard-headedness of mine eventually led me to capture UFC gold in 2016. I fought Holly Holm and won via 5th round rear naked choke. That was a night to remember. Although I am still currently competing under the UFC banner as a professional mixed martial artist, I know that this chapter is coming to a close. I have been fighting for almost 20 years, and through that journey, I have learned so much. And at this point of my life, I want to share this valuable knowledge for anybody who, like me, has decided they want to have some say in the things we want out of our future. For those of you who want to grow with intention, this podcast is for you. So, what can you expect from the B4G podcast? As I mentioned, I've learned a tremendous amount on this journey, a lot about mindset, a lot about discovering myself, and really trying to find how great I can be in whatever it is that I do. I've learned that men and women are different. Shocker. I know we all know this. I know we are different, but I don't think we really understand how we are different. So I've learned a lot about training as a female. If you are a female or know any females, you may want to share this podcast with them. Although this does not exclude men, because for you guys, you can do anything that I'm doing at any time that you want. But for females, we kind of have to be a little more mindful on the timing of things. I've learned that fasting and training should look different for men and for women. I personally have trained the large majority of my career according to male model. And I actually won my world title training according to male model. So it's not that it can't be done. It's just that I think any woman who works out should know the things that I know now. And I think I would have been much better off for it had I known these things sooner. But better late than never. I promise that if you are a man listening to this, it's helpful to understand these things too, because it'll help keep the peace in the house. Help her, help you. It's a win for all of us. I've also learned the importance of slowing down and becoming a truly present person and parent. And better yet, how to do that when you don't have time to stop for anything. The mindset shift is something any one of us can do, and it won't cost you time and it won't cost you money. All it takes is for you to get intentional. I've learned what kind of workouts maximize results while minimizing the time spent in or out of the gym. I'm talking 5-minute workouts that will give you the same or better results than running for 40 minutes would. Thank goodness, because I'm always short on time. So I'm excited to share with you this as well. Lastly, I will continue to be open and candid about my struggles and my successes, and I will bring on experts and personalities that will teach both you and I how to optimize our life in the busy world we live in. In closing, I would like to take a moment to thank the people who have supported me. I'll start with my mom, who has always seen the best in me. Thank you for never holding me back, especially for the simple fact that I was born a female. Thank you to my dad for being a constant in my life. I know whenever I need an unbiased, honest opinion and support, I can always call you up. Thank you to my fiance, Johnny, for being such a great father and for providing the structure and love that I needed in my passion-driven life. Thank you to my children for driving me to choose growth every day. I will continue to elevate my ceiling because I know that someday this will become your floor. And I want to lead by example on how to love yourself and how to help others around you. I will do everything in my power to be my best for you. Thank you to all my coaches, my high school wrestling coach, Jason Mendiola, and Coach Waite, and Coach Bobby Brokenshire, for pushing me beyond what I thought I was capable of. Thank you to my MMA coaches, Rich Guerin, Robert Follis, Jimmy Gifford, Rick Little, and Kirk White. And my fiance, Johnny, of course. He's always there helping and coaching me in many ways as well. You guys have taught me so much that I cannot thank you enough. I have become a well-rounded fighter because of you. And thank you to my team here at B4G Podcast, Bev, Natalia, and Mike. I wouldn't be here launching this next step in my dream if it wasn't for you all. And last but not least, thank you for being here with me. I know you have so many things to do today and tomorrow, so I value your time and your input. I'm genuinely looking forward to having you join me each Thursday for another episode of the Built for Growth podcast. And as always, thank you for listening.